Our next speaker is Tyler Jollimore, and Tyler is the owner and operator of Knotweed AL Weed Management. Tyler's company specializes in the management and remediation of invasive plant species in the Maritimes. Tyler holds his MSc and BSc in agriculture from Dalhousie University. Tyler's thesis focused on evaluating chemical control strategies for Japanese knotweed in Nova Scotia, and he built his business based on the fruits of those research efforts. So Tyler is going to give us an overview of commercial knotweed management cases in Nova Scotia. Tyler, the virtual floor is yours. We can see your presentation there, and I didn't hear you there.
Perfect.
Yeah, okay, perfect. All right, thank you.
All right, good morning. Thank you for the introduction. So we're just going to do a quick overview of some of the operations that I've been doing over the past couple of years. So, knotweeds. I'm sure everybody here is familiar with them. They're a bit of a pain in the butt. They're a polycarpic, meaning they flower multiple times without dying. Herbaceous, meaning no woody tissue. Perennial, they have somewhat of an indefinite lifespan. And they're rhizomatous, meaning that they largely spread through their underground stems. So they were introduced to North America and Europe from Japan circa the 1800s, and they've been in Nova Scotia for at least 100 years, according to herbarium records. Initially used for horticultural use, property boundaries, which they are arguably still used for today, and because it was pretty. And it really only started to fall out of favor around the 1920s when the problems associated with it became clear. Like it's pretty aggressive. In its range of origin, which is like Japan and East Asia, it's a primary colonizer of volcanic slopes where it helps to stabilize soil aggregates and attract other species to the area. And as you can see in this picture here, it's like not that big. It's only like 50, 75 centimeters tall at most. But unfortunately, here it's a very different animal. So in Nova Scotia, it's thought to only reproduce asexually, and I'll explain that more in a second. It mostly spreads by rhizomes and nodular stems, which in the stems is a more rare occurrence. And while seeds can be produced on like sole Japanese knotweed populations, none of them are typically viable. But unfortunately, I was in Cape Breton this summer and found some viable seedlings. So I have a pet now that I'm keeping locked in the basement with a grow light. Um, Eventually, we'll send it off for more research. But yeah, it's a nasty species. So typically in Nova Scotia, you're seeing specimens that are about 250 to 300 centimeters tall at peak height, with 2 to 3 centimeters in stem diameter. Roots can travel up to 3 meters underground, which is pretty deep. And it's a very, very prolific flower producer, which tends to attract quite a lot of pollinators to it, despite the fact that it doesn't necessarily have the ability to sexually reproduce on its own, at least in the case of the Japanese knotweeds. And it's apparently quite nectar rich for the bee for beekeepers. So three kind of characteristics of the species that makes it really problematic. It's got really rapid growth in the early growing season. Its tall canopy limits light transmission to other plants, and it's high. And it's got like 30 to 40 stems per meter squared. So that's really hard to compete with. So there's just good old time lapse that I did. Let's see if it'll play. So as you can see, the knotweed comes up and absolutely outstrips everything else growing in the area. And, there wasn't much else growing in that area in the first place, but still. All right, and this is just along the Wrights River. It's pretty damaging along riverbanks. So it leads to all kinds of problems. It can accelerate soil erosion, reduce native plant species biodiversity, and also increase the risk of flooding because that residue can plug up infrastructure. So, why do people call me? Typically, they want it gone because they feel it's a threat to their property value. It impacts line of sight near roadways and driveways. They have a lot of anxiety regarding all of the future problems it might cause. It's creating a non-hazardous obstruction, e.g., like it's blocking their view of the ocean, and they have plans for the space that is not compatible with that species being there. Like they want a garden or they want to put in a patio. Typically, by the time people are reaching out to me, they've already decided they want to go ahead with chemical control methods because they've either exhausted other strategies or they've done some reading and know it's probably not going to work. So, why focus on chemical control? It works really well and it has really easy to measure effects. We are exclusively using glyphosate, so that'll be your Roundup based products because it's widely available and it generally has a lower environmental impact than other herbicides I could opt to use. Excavation's arguably more expensive and not something I know how to do. And it's arguably going to be impractical in a lot of cases. Like you can dig out lots of soil, but unless you plan on replacing it, you're going to have a massive gash in the ground. And it just isn't going to, you can't get an excavator in a lot of the places that I'm working. And there's also really no place to safely dispose of this biomass that I'm aware of where you wouldn't be causing it to spread further. Um, I've had like a number of clients who have been the victims of illegal dumping, and Knotweed has come along with that dumping, and very, very hard to track down who did it. Um, Additionally, it also keeps that if there are any surviving seeds in the seed bank beneath the knotweed, it also can keep them like intact and allow for more easy succession planning. So the process for people is they make contact. I go out and do an assessment. As of 2025, that assessment automatically includes a drone flight. And then we do some ground measurements with some GIS. We also use Remap to evaluate property boundaries to figure out if there are any third parties involved that we may need to make contact with. Um, and at that point, we're also determining the goals of management. So it is not always going to be possible in every case, and it's also like not always financially feasible for the client to go for like a full eradication. Sometimes we're going for full eradication, sometimes we're just going for like peripheral control to prevent it from spreading out any further, as well as just being mindful of what other sort of non-target objects might be in the area. They have a garden bed nearby, stuff like that. Then they'll sign a management plan or a general services contract. Then we'll do our first treatment. We'll put in access ways if we need to, and then we'll do our first spray. We'll do a damage check at least 14 days later, and then we may do either another treatment at 14 days post, or it might be later, just depending on scheduling and when I'm in a particular part of the province. Then you get a treatment report at the end of the season, and then you get a follow-up assessment and retreatments as needed every year. And we do everything we do is with a backpack sprayer because you can't use heavy equipment with this. So let's talk about the first case. So this was in Southwest Nova Scotia. It was an 852 meter square population based on a contiguous rectangle with basically on the coastal extent, as well as some infiltration into a lawn space with a couple of minor scattered satellite populations. So the reported problem on this one was that it had a negative effect on their ocean view. They could not see the ocean from ground level. When we were on scene, we also observed quite a lot of coastal erosion plus peripheral spread and a lot of species loss in that area. It was a sole custody population, meaning that we did not need to obtain third party consent to go ahead with treatment. We did have some adjacent neighbors who had questions, so they were informed and they've received it, and they are receiving a copy of the treatment report when I can get the email from them. This case is still an ongoing one, but let's go through it. So this is August 4, 2025. This is prior to accessway installation. So we're about 64 meters above the ground in this photograph. So as you can see, it's quite large. So, and this is just the view from the client side of the property. This is August 16th, I believe. And then this is just the view from, this is just from over the water here. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of erosion. And for the bits that are like right on the coast, like sort of there, we weren't able to get at these this year just because we had no way to safely access it because we have rappelling equipment. The problem is like there's nowhere to put it in the knotweed stand because the soils tend to be relatively unstable and not good enough for rebar. So once I can drive a truck in and then anchor something to it, then it'll be a little bit safer to access those populations. So treatments we did access ways on August 5th with our long blades. We did our first treatment on August 15th and 16th. We had to split it up because wind conditions started to not cooperate on the 15th. And then we did a follow-up visit on August 30th to evaluate damage. We were going to do a treatment that day, but then the weather didn't cooperate. Then we did our second treatment on September 8th of 2025. In this case, we used Roundup Weather Max at 14 grams per liter, and we did a spot application with our backpack sprayer using a telescopic wand. So this is what an access way looks like. So the benefit of doing this is one, you create low wind speeds in the local area because you're basically creating channels that the wind has to go through. So this can be super advantageous for lots of reasons. It'll also prevent spray potentially from leaving the treatment area in, some parts of it, but it's not a perfect solution. Anyhow, and this is September 8, 2025. So you're really only seeing the effects of one of the treatment at this point because this is the day we performed our second treatment. But basically, you're seeing massive amounts of defoliation, which is what you want to see in these cases. And that's good. So this is August 16th from the ground view. This is on the third party side. Hello, kitten. Excuse me. And then this is August 30th. So as you can see, we managed to spare quite a lot of the goldenrod in this area, mostly because we're being quite careful about when we're applying. 1 second. Sorry, kitten's causing trouble. Okay. Yeah, so it's looking pretty good there. And then this is just the view from the client side. So as you can see, quite a bit of defoliation. And then this is just the view from the bisection access way. So good damage effect. So results thus far. You've got significant defoliation within the growing season, which is what you would expect with a herbicide, with stem density reductions and visibility improvements expected in 2026. There is a bit of a to-do with this one. All that knotweed residue needs to be cleaned up. One, because it gets in the way, and it can actually like block herbicides from hitting other tissues, but also it's to visualize smaller returning pieces of knotweed. Sometimes people call it bonsai knotweed that can be much more difficult to see, and you don't want anything to sort of hide and get away. So what we'll do is we'll go in, we'll cut that down, and we'll do like a controlled burn in a barrel. That way that residue doesn't like pile up on site. We'll post an update in June 2026, and then we'll get the chance to address the cliff face portion of that population. All right, case 2, septic. So this one was initiated in 2023, so we get a little bit more of a longitudinal view of the long-term effects. So this one was near Halifax. It's about a 300-meter square population, give or take, of knotweed on a sloped surface adjacent to a septic tank. So we did a quick look at the septic to make sure there was no damage, but I didn't see any evidence of infiltration, and it didn't look like there were any wet spots in the knotweed population, so probably fine, but I'm glad we could address that for the client. So the reported problem was they were worried about this damaging their septic tank, and they also just disliked the species, which is valid. On scene, we also observed the same problems. Plus, we also observed there's colt's foot as well. So that was just treated incidentally as well. And this is another sole custody population. So this one is a little different because back in 2023, we were not using commercial herbicide formulations. So we were using the domestic formula of Roundup concentrate. And we were also using a different concentration at the time because they have different label rates of what you're allowed to do. So the first treatment, September 1st, 2023, we did 7 grams Roundup concentrate. Then as you can sort of walk through this, second treatment, October 3rd, another just to address non-symptomatic tissues. Then we reassessed in 2024 and 2025, and we just have been continuing to do follow-ups as needed. We did spot applications with our wand again, and in this case, access ways were not required because the population was sort of like had enough of a natural accessing path that we were able to treat the entirety of the population without cutting it down. So September 1st, 2023, this is just prior to treatment. Bang, massive defoliation, which is what you saw in the previous case. Then if we move to the next year, June 1st, 2024, there's barely any knotweed emerging at this point. It's either significantly delayed because the herbicides have caused damage to the tissues. So like it's blocking carbohydrates from moving around, and also like it's just slow. And then we do another follow-up on October 1st, 2024. So as you can see, quite a few non-knotweed species returned to this area, like fairly quickly post-treatment. So we did do like a quick like survey on what species wound up showing up. We saw some foxglove, Canada goldenrod, some lupins, stiltgrass, although I'm not 100% sure about that. A couple of new pine tree seedlings, some New England aster, lamb's quarter, buttercup, problems of its own, I know, and some creeping thyme. So decent seed bank return, I would say. Observations at that point in the case were that rather than like having these large, big, easy to spot pieces of knotweed, we tended to get like lots of these little ones that were harder to spot. And while these don't always survive like the season, if they aren't retreated, there's a possibility that you are leaving that knotweed in the area to cause problems in the future. So as a result of this, and as a result of also the reduced surface area of the knotweed, we opted to increase our concentration at first to 12.6 grams per liter, and then we went up to 14 grams per liter when we switched to the Roundup Weather Max. And that'll just hopefully help to address that reduced leaf surface area. So as of July 1st, 2025, there wasn't a ton of knotweed there at all, and still lots of other species. And then July 5, this is July 1st from the alternative angle. And as you can see, there's a little bit of knotweed right there. And then there's a couple like smaller ones, but we mostly observed that that a lot of those like surviving pieces of knotweed emerged in the fall, so fairly slow to emerge. So you have to just be very mindful of when you're actually visiting these sites. So, conclusions on case two. Reasonably effective treatment results to date, and we're reevaluating in 2026. We had a really good return of non-knotweed species, so hopefully those will help revegetate the area. Arguably, at this point, the client could take over management of any small survivors that pop up. They could use a bit of like pre-mixed Roundup, and they would just need a little bit of recognition training because the bonsai knotweed doesn't really look like the regular knotweed. It's quite short-stunted and can like pass for something else. The only thing that we're sort of waiting on is like, is this like a permanent reduction or have we just induced dormancy? So we're just keeping an eye on it, but the client is generally happy with results thus far. So just because this is a public forum and I really want to say a couple of things here. Populations with dual land custody are an absolute pain. We did a couple of them this summer, but we can't talk about them yet because we have to wait for the client to read the report, the third party to read the report, and then I can actually disclose it. It makes enforcing a buffer zone very, very difficult. So one of the cases that I worked in the western part of Nova Scotia this year, it was on their driveway, creating a line of sight hazard. So we treated up to the property boundary, but because we can't go any further than that, the knotweed is going to continue to re-infiltrate. Like sort of as like even if we kill it in that one spot. So like we're gonna have to consider putting in trees or other things that can reduce knotweed stem density, but it turns it into a chronic issue, and it can be a bit of a headache for clients. It's also becoming like increasingly difficult to manage knotweed populations along interfaces with roads and other infrastructure because snowplows and like vegetation cutting by like Department of Transportation tend to respread knotweed into areas where I have killed it, and it is a little bit frustrating. So we need maybe a little bit like more recognition at the government level to stop playing with the invasive species and stop spreading it back. We also really need some regulations to ensure like displacement of knotweed species, say like by excavation or construction companies, don't spread onto other places because like you can be like you could be the most careful operator of an excavator you want to be, but like it takes a piece the size like of a fingernail to turn into a new population of knotweed. So it's a very blunt instrument that tends to result in a lot of like contamination of not like of areas where the knotweed did not need to be. And contaminated fill continues to be a problem. So these are just issues that I'm kind of paying attention to and hoping that we get a little bit of collaboration on in the future. So if you're looking for more information, you can always check out the website. There's even more case reports up there. The first case report should be up on the website later on today. I'd like to thank Jacob Saul as well for all of his work on cases, as well as being my apprentice this summer, and to all my clients for their continued patronage and publication permission. I'll take some questions.
That's great, Tyler. You can open up the Q&A on your screen if you like. There's quite a few questions that have come up.
Oh boy. Okay, let's see. So I need to hang on. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to Zoom.
Let me help you out a little bit.
Yeah, help me out a little bit here. I'm not good at technology anymore.
So there has been there's been a couple of questions about knotweed as being an effective mitigator of erosion. And they're looking for your comments on that.
So it's probably an effective mitigator of erosion in areas that are not likely to erode in the first place. Because so basically where the erosion tends to be occurring with Japanese knotweed are areas that are flood prone because it's got a root structure that is like not fantastic at holding on to soil. So like if an area floods, it tends to cause quite a bit of like surface erosion as that water moves through an area. It's probably good at preventing erosion from wind as well as precipitation because it leaves quite a lot of biomass on the ground. But if all that biomass is taken away, then it's just gonna erode anyways.
Okay. There's another question about overcoming the fears of using herbicide to control, and should we discourage mechanical control?
That's a tough one. So you need some mechanical control. Like in your management practice. Like if you have like a dangerous line of sight restrict like obstruction like near a roadway, you need to cut it down. But typically what I've been doing now is I'm not in the habit of cutting it all the way down because the goal is eventually to retreat it. What I'll do is I'll cut it part way down, allow for a bit of regeneration to occur, and then hopefully when it's moving carbs in the right direction again, then it will be treated. But we cut just enough to eliminate the visual obstruction. But like so like the downside to chemical control is that it's a slow process. Like it takes a couple of years to like cut. Well, I mean, you can get results in 1 year, but like you need follow up. And mechanical control is a lot faster, and it probably works better for people like on a timetable, like if they have construction plans. The problem is like without like a designated place to dispose of these residues, we're getting quite like a few inquiries regarding illegal dumping, and like it's not really fair to the people who wind up with this crap in their yard.
More evidence, essentially.
More evidence, yeah. Like I need case reports.
Okay. There's some questions here about handling knotweed along waterways and
Okay.
impacts on water, how to mitigate it. What about, what does that treatment do? Any
It depends how close to a waterway you actually are. So basically, I won't treat any population that where the canopy is directly overhanging the waterway because when you're using handheld equipment, buffer zone requirements don't apply. But like that's for pesticide applicators. For homeowners, I'd encourage them to be like incredibly careful, or if possible, pick up like a formulation of a herbicide that is rated for aquatic zones. Because pretty sure Weather Max, you can't like if that gets into the water, it might actually cause some problems. Probably not in the quantities that I'm using, but because like for example, in case one in grand total, although it's not a waterway case, mind you, total like grams of glyphosate applied to that population was like 840 grams. So it's not a ton to like spike your phosphorus numbers, but like be very mindful and like also like for example, like I'm also working like on a case in Sherbrooke Village. So what we did before we started was we consulted the local watershed authority and got like we just kind of got permission, but also like just ask them, what do you guys think of this? Da 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 da. And just like do a good consultation, like if you're along a waterway, is my recommendation.
right? Probably a good recommendation at any time, but
Yeah.
especially during when you're along a waterway.
Yeah, because like
Go
it's
ahead.
not coming from a helicopter.
Right.
Like we can be fairly like careful like with this. Like as you saw in case one, like there was like virtually no damage to the nearby goldenrod. And part of that was that we did the access ways. We didn't have to cut down the entire population, which allows you to like baffle your wind basically. So yeah.
Right. So speaking of helicopters, not quite
Ah,
helicopters, but one question is, knotweed seems to be, although it's prohibited now, knotweed seems to be a perfect use for variable rate drone spraying, working along slopes and unstable ground. Would it be a benefit
ah.
to your business, or is it doing by hands likely similar?
There's a couple of problems. One, so we use micro drones. So those are drones under 250 grams. Um, if you're getting into doing spraying with drones, you're probably getting into your basic flight certificates for drones, which I have. But also like if you're spraying any significant quantity, you're looking at advanced operations for drones over 25 kilograms. Um, so I probably wouldn't, one, because I can't see what I'm doing that well on a drone. You'd probably need like a fairly advanced sensor package, maybe like a bit of infrared, because I need to see fairly well how much leaf coverage I'm getting, if that makes sense. Like I need to know leaves are sprayed to the point of wet but not runoff. And I
Yeah.
just don't trust that technology yet. Plus, like if that drone goes like kaput and like dies or like malfunctions, like that just seems like a recipe for like a disaster.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think the tech is good enough yet to trust it with, and we're getting decent enough results with the handheld. And you know, change is hard, but also, yeah, I just think there's a lot of regulatory barriers to doing that sort of thing. And I think those regulatory barriers are there for a good reason.
Right. Okay, here's an interesting one, very practical. What's the best way to kill off live knotweed stems once removed? Black garbage bags in the sun, perhaps?
So I don't so my first question would be why are we cutting down live knotweed stems if it's for like a line of sight obstruction, my recommendation, cut it and leave it where it is. Let it leave the leaves attached so it desiccates as quickly as possible. I'd leave it there for a month and then you're probably fine. I don't know where this black garbage bag recommendation comes from because all you're doing is creating a humid, moist environment for the stems to root in. So don't
Ah,
just let it desiccate unless you're like in a high risk flooding area where that might like wind up on somebody else's property. I would just leave it to desiccate where it is. That's what we do.
right. Okay. Here's an interesting one. I think Sean Dahl says in some jurisdictions, public knotweed mapping is available, which is used in real estate transactions, and the purpose of that is it encourages people to manage knotweed on their properties because it could have an impact on the value of their property. Do you think this
So
approach
yeah,
would be effective?
I have no problem with people self-reporting. I certainly can't do it because it'd be a massive breach of privacy for the client.
No, no.
Yeah. Yeah, but like maybe like so like when people are buying homes, they don't often think about, I wonder what species are in the landscape unless like they have advanced knowledge. So like um it might. I think it would be good if it were flagged on properties. I mean like this is like absolutely a self-interested like it's in my interests if that happens because it would result in more phone calls to me. But yeah, I think it might be a good idea to do so. But like also like it's relying on people self-reporting and then like I don't know. It seems like there might be some privacy and like almost like charter barriers to this, but we'd see.
Well, I think the underlying premise is that it would be established legally so that,
Yeah, no, that'd
yeah,
be great because
yeah,
like it does kind of suck when somebody like I don't know, hypothetical or true story, somebody from Ontario buys a house without like viewing the landscape, or they are viewing the landscape in the wintertime. The seller of the property has cut down the residue um, to conceal that fact. There's some snow on the ground, so you can't see it. And then like in the spring, surprise, there's knotweed. Um, and then there's no way to hold that person responsible. It does kind of suck because like it does cost to deal with this stuff, and it can be a multi-year project.